We'll call the meeting to order. Good evening, Mayor, council members, members of the public. This is the 2025 or the 2024 Truth and Taxation hearing. Briefly on valuations, because I know it's been a topic that people show up for this meeting that they want to talk about, and so I do like to at least touch on it. In Minnesota, the market value of property is determined by January 2nd of the year prior to the year in which taxes on that property are due. So in other words, the market value for taxes payable in 2025 were set in January of 2024. Property values and statements recently received are based off of home sales or property sales, if you have a commercial property, from October of 2022 to September of 2023. Property owners will receive a new notice of market values from the assessor in March or April of 2025. Questions on those valuations should be addressed at the open book meeting in May or June, which is held at the county assessor's office. A little bit, if you have some questions on maybe property values, I always like to show this graph just to show you what's going on within the community in regards to property sales and median home values. This is a 10-year look at what home values have done within the community. The 2024 numbers are through October of 2024. And so obviously value increases do have a factor in property taxes that are paid. And I'll try to do a little bit to explain that. And so I think there's about a 7.5% increase in values over this past year. And they've almost doubled in the last 10 years. So first off, before we get into some of the budget stuff and the tax levies, the preliminary tax levy sent in September and the property tax effect, the statement that you got in the mail, showed a steady tax increase of 7.9%. At that time, the preliminary budget was balanced. The revised budget being discussed tonight includes a 5.8% tax levy increase in the balanced budget. So since September, the city has adjusted its revenue and expense projections and eliminated roughly almost $184,000 in taxes since the preliminary budget was adopted in September. So what that means is that the statement that you got in the mail, the actual bill, assuming what gets presented tonight is approved by the council, will be lower when you get your tax statement in March, April, based off of budget adjustments the staff and city council have made since September. Before we jump into it, I always like to share a little bit about how does the city of Hutchinson compare to other cities both in the county, throughout the state, and how do we compare to other regional centers that we compare ourselves to when it comes to metrics. So in regards to, once again, this is 2024 numbers, because obviously 2025 numbers have not been approved yet. But when it comes to McLeod County and the cities within McLeod County, Hutchinson has the second lowest tax rate of the 9 cities. That's 2024's property tax rate. You can see what the preliminary levy was. This was based off of what we established in September. And this is what we're proposing now tonight. So there is a proposed property tax increase for 2025. We compare ourselves to 19 other outstate micropolitan areas, our regional centers. Those are defined by the state. So out of those 19, we were roughly middle of the pack. We were tied for 10th in 2024 with our property tax rate of 54.32. That regional center average is 53.81%, so we're kind of right in line with the regional center average. When you take a look at the statewide cities, so all the cities putting all their tax rates together, that's the average tax rate is 62.59%. So when people ask how is the city's tax rates, I say we're roughly average compared to the state and to the rest of the regional centers. We're not low, we're not high, we're kind of right in the middle of the pack. Just a couple other metrics we always like to share. When it comes to percentage of our population below the poverty level, we're the 5th lowest of those outstate regional centers. We do have the 4th highest median household income, the 5th highest median home value, And out of those alternate regional centers, received the third lowest in local government aid payments. When we looked at the preliminary tax levy increases, so this is what was established in September. The statewide average for Minnesota cities was at 8.8%, with the overall property tax increase being proposed at 6%. And so 8.8%, you may recall our preliminary levy was at 7.9%. The 6% that includes when you add together the county, the school districts, the townships, any special taxing districts. That's what the overall proposed property tax rate increase was on average throughout the state in September. Generally, those will go down anywhere from about 0.5% to a full percent between now and when final budgets and tax levies are adopted in December, just based off of historical context when we went and looked back at how do they end up between the preliminary and the final. One of the things I would like to do for comparisons is just look at the price of government, and this is the average cost of city services based off of personal income of the population in town. And so basically for every dollar that's spent, about $2.50 cents goes to local government, goes to things that are related to the city of Hutchinson. Minnesota, probably like a lot of other states, has a very complex property tax system, and so I think it's important that if you're here with concerns on the property taxes, that there's really 14 different reasons that may vary from year to year and why property taxes go up or go down. Some of those the city has an impact on or an influence on, others we do not. But I'd like to list the 14 up here on the screen. The ones that are in color are the ones the city has a direct impact on. That's obviously the budget and tax levy that we're talking about tonight. Any special assessments against a property, so if you had a road project that was done, there might be a special assessment that's assigned to that. And then the special districts. In Hutchinson, there are two special taxing districts. One is the EDA, the other is the HRA. The council has the final say on what those levies are. They're established by other boards, but they have to have final approval by the city council. And so we will touch on those tonight as well. But you can see the other really 11 items are something that are out of the hands of the city. And so I think it's important when you're looking at your tax statement is to keep an eye on those. Did your market value go up? If you're a commercial property, you have an estate tax that's assigned to it that residential properties don't have. Are you in the township? Are you in the county? What did your county budget do? What did your school district's tax levies or budget do? So there's many different factors that go into property tax. Like I said, what we're here to talk about tonight is the ones the cities have a direct impact on, the ones that we can influence. There's really 5 components of the property tax system. So this is the complicated part when we look at why taxes may or may not go up in a given year. One is local property tax levies, and that's something we've talked about, that yes, it is proposed to increase it at the city level. Another factor is your property tax classification, and that ranges from 0.25% to 2%. That's set by the state of Minnesota. Matt, what does that mean? Well, if you own a residential property, that has a tax classification rate of 1%. If you own a commercial property, that's likely 1.5% to 2%. That's set by the state of Minnesota. Minnesota has established a policy where they say we are going to tax properties that, in their mind, that produces revenue, so maybe a commercial or industrial. We are going to tax them at a higher rate than we are residential. That's a policy set by the state. It's nothing that we have any control over, but it does have an impact, especially on your commercial and industrial sides of the tax system. The third aspect is property value. This is based off of property sales and set by the county assessor. And the state has a very strict rule on what those values must be set at, and it has to be compared to the market. There are ways for you to contest your property value, and if you've got concerns on your property value being too high, I would encourage you to talk with the county assessor. They can give you an explanation how they got to that, and then they can also give you an explanation on how you can potentially contest those valuations. But that value increase may have an impact on whether or not your taxes went up or not, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. There are tax credits that are available for certain properties, and then there are the state general tax too, which is mainly assigned to commercial and industrial properties. So when we're looking at your local tax, it's important to keep in mind the tax rate. That's what it gets assigned to your property. So you may hear us tonight talk about how we're going to have a 5.8% tax levy increase. The first thing that may come to your mind is either A, my taxes went up more than 5.8%, or B, they're less than 5.8%. How is that? When we set a tax levy, it doesn't mean that every property in town has an increase of 5.8 or 7.8%. That we take our, say, your big basket of funds and then we increase it by 5.8%. And so that's going to get spread out amongst the various different properties based off of tax classification, the value of your home, and whatnot. And so the important thing is that when we set our tax levy, it impacts our tax rate. And this is how you come up with the tax rate. So it's a complicated thing, but I think it's important for us to highlight that. So when we talk about a 5.8% increase, that's the money we're looking to collect from all of the taxing districts within the city. That doesn't mean every individual property is going to see a 5.8% property tax increase. Sometimes it's higher than that, sometimes it's lower than that. So there is a formula you can use to determine what portion of your tax bill is related to the city. We use the proposed median home value for next year to come up with that. And so with our proposed tax rate for next year, a home value of $275,000 is expected to pay about $1,441 in city property taxes. At same value, the city would pay just over $1,500 in Glencoe and just under $1,700 in Winstead for comparison purposes. So we looked at various different options. Option 4 was what the preliminary levy was set at. That's at 7.9%. What we're discussing tonight is option 3, which is a 5.8% tax levy increase. And assuming your home value increased as the rest of the median home values did, we're anticipating about a $25,000 increase in home values on average. With our proposed property tax levy increase for next year, a home value of $275,000 can expect about a $164 increase in their city property taxes. The preliminary levy was at $192, so we cut roughly, my fast math, $28 per month, or per year, right? Yeah, for the year, and property taxes from our preliminary one. Preliminary one was set in September. One thing that to keep in mind is that the state had set a homestead exclusion. This was a property tax relief for residential properties. And so if you go back to this chart, you'll notice this homestead exclusion. So let's say your home's valued at $275,000. Minnesota, through this homestead exclusion, has given you a tax relief saying that your home may be valued at $275,000, but you're only going to get taxed for a value of $253,000. And so that's what the exclusion they have. It's a declining scale based off of the value and the amount of credit that you will receive. But that was established back in 2012. That was adjusted, was it in 24 for 25? Right. So that was adjusted in 24 for 25, so they actually increased. I think a lot of that had to do with overall the values increasing throughout the state. They increased those numbers. And so there are higher thresholds now for property tax relief. So for instance, this same home last year would have paid, if they hadn't been that market value exclusion change, there would have been $53 more in taxes that you would have paid. Now the downside of that is that increases your tax rate because it spreads the burden out to all the other taxes. So when they give a relief to the residential, the industrial and commercial have to pick up that relief if the city doesn't decrease taxes. So that's the one downside of the exclusion, is that it then pushes the burden to your commercial and industrial properties. This graph just kind of shows you a history of the value of the city and the growth in that value. This past year, we're expecting our value is just over 1.5 billion. On average, we've seen growth in our market value. It's about 5 point, my facts here right. On average, it's been about 6.8% since 2016, our value growth. And so that's a good thing, and that allows us to spread out that tax burden amongst the different values. And so increased value in the community is good for assisting in keeping down the tax rate. This is just kind of another summary of that growth. You can see where the growth within the community has occurred. This past year, we saw large growth in agriculture. Previous years, you can see apartments saw a large increase in 2023, and you can kind of see the larger increase in residential values over the last couple years. But roughly 76% of the city's total value can be found within our residential properties. And I highlight that for both the council and the public, so that means when we do tax rate increases, it puts more of a burden on residential properties because 76% of our value is found within residential. It's part of the reason that we try to recruit more industrial, more commercial properties into town, is to help loosen that burden on the residential properties. But roughly 76% of our value is found within our residential value within the community. As I shared earlier, there's many different aspects that go into your bill. There's roughly 5 different taxing districts here in Hutchinson. And this pie just kind of shows you how that's changed, at least from 23 to 24. We won't know 25 until the springtime once everybody has finalized their tax levies. But so when you're looking at your overall total tax bill, roughly 36 to 37% of that tax bill is going to the city of Hutchinson. And the other 73, 74%, or 63, 64% is going to either the county, the school district, or one of the special taxing districts. And so what's important to keep in mind is that I'm not here to say whether your tax bill is too high or too low. We're here to talk about the city's portion of that. We've showed you information that shows the city's portion is roughly middle of the pack. I can't speak on behalf of the county and the school district and where those tax levies are in comparison to the other regional centers we shared with you or to other taxing industries throughout the state. I would encourage you to attend those tax hearings. Hopefully they'll share that information with you on how that's compared, or if not, ask your school district or your county for that information. So that's kind of a rough summary. Now we're going to get more into the actual numbers of our tax levy and general fund budget. Always like to share at least our mission statement, because I think, as I've shared with the council, the budgets that we establish is the biggest policy decision that's made by the city council. It really helps drive the programs and services that were provided. And so that's our mission statement. Those are 7 core areas of focus. So, Matt, why to highlight that? When we're establishing our budget, we're looking to do one of those 7 things. We provide public safety, health and recreation, transportation, economic development, environment, good government, and housing. So I can point to probably every single one of our budget decisions having an impact on one of those 7 areas within the community. So as we look at our tax levies for 2025, it's really broken into 3 within the city and then the 2 special taxing districts that council has a final say on. So within the city, we have a general levy tax fund. There's a tax abatement that was a business subsidy for Uponor when they expanded into the community. And then we have debt funds. So what's being proposed for increases for next year is a 5.9% increase within our general fund. The tax abatement levy staying the same, and then a 5.6% increase in our debt fund for an overall city tax levy increase of 5.8%. The EDA and the HRA have proposed a 3.3% increase and a 3% increase for next year. If you factor all of those in, if those are all approved by the city council and later in December, you're looking at a total tax impact of about a 5.7% increase from 24 to 25. Once again, statewide average for cities is at 8.8%. We're looking at about a 5.8% increase. And overall, about 6%, we're at that 5%. So we're below what you could say would be the statewide average for proposed tax increases for 2025. We talk about our debt levy. These are the different areas that debt levy is covering. When we looked at these right here, so the ones that say 2014 to 2024, those are associated with road projects. So that's our street infrastructure. All of those are essentially related to debt that we incur to do infrastructure improvements. Police facility was added in 23. That shows up on there. That's obviously a large payment. And one thing that's being proposed for next year that would be a new debt would be funding for a new ladder truck. And we're looking at almost $70,000 increase in our debt fund to cover that debt payment. This is just kind of a graphic look at how our tax levies have increased, if you want to say, over the last 7-8 years on average. It's been about a 3.4% increase since 2017. If you go back 10 years, about a 3.3% average tax levy increase over the last 10 years within the city of Hutchinson. Once again, we're looking at a 5.7 to 5.8% increase next year. So the proposed 2025 tax levy includes a 10th straight year of an increase in the general fund portion of that levy. This is also the 4th straight year of an increase in the debt fund portion of the levy. Compared to 2025, our total tax levy increased by just over 40%. The average annual tax levy increase since 2015 has been 3.3%. And if you're looking at it from a per capita standpoint, we're up $661 from $617 in 2024. I'm battling a cold, so that's why my voice is getting worse the more and more I talk. So, some just additional information. The city's growth in tax capacity has slowed down, increasing the pressure on tax rates. So what we're saying is that value isn't increasing as much as it did in 22, 21, 20, 2019. And so when you're not seeing as high of a growth in value, that puts more of a pressure on tax rates, and the higher your tax levy increase is going to be, the higher that tax rate is going to be, because you're not seeing that value coming in and replacing the increase in that debt or that levy. So the second time that the tax levy outpaces the tax capacity in the last 10 years, resulting in a likely increase in our city tax rate. 2025 city tax rate is expected to be 2.6% higher than our 2024 tax rate. This is the second consecutive tax rate increase since 2014. I'll kind of show you what that history has looked like. So a median home value would see $164 city tax bill increase based on that 10% increase in your market value. A property possibly might not see a tax increase if its value did not increase at the same rate as the median home value. So for instance, a property valued at $250,000 in 2024, if it stayed the same in 2025, they'd see a $9 increase in its city tax bill based off of what we are proposing tonight. So that's the important thing when I say look at your tax statement. Did your value go up? Because that will have a big impact on whether or not your property tax bill went up, along with what's being proposed tonight from the city council and the staff. That's the 10-year tax rate trend for the city, and as I noted, what's being proposed for next year, that will be a second straight consecutive year of a tax rate increase after 8 straight years of that tax rate going down. So when we look at the revenues of our general fund that's being proposed for next year, once again you can see that 5.8% increase. Other taxes, that includes things like our cable franchise fee. We have a lodging tax in town. The lodging tax goes to Convention and Visitors Bureau. License and permits, that's mainly building permits. We are expecting a slight uptick in revenue just based off of some of what we're projecting for demand for new permits next year. Intergovernmental revenue, that's your state aid money that the city receives We're projecting a slight increase in that. A lot of that has to do with pension funds that the city's receiving, and has to go into those various different pensions. Charges for service are expected to go up 10.6%. So that's when you use a certain city service and you have to pay a fee. So if you go to the aquatic center, you have to pay to get into the building. That's where the charges for service will come out of. Fines and forfeitures are what they are. Miscellaneous revenue, most of that is interest earnings that the city has and investment funds that we invest our money in. So we're continuing to see some good returns. I think we've tampered that down from what we've had in past years with interest rates starting to come back down, but it's still been a positive thing for the city the last couple of years. Transfer ins, that's the money that we receive from Hutch Utilities, the liquor store, Creekside, and the money that we may transfer in from the water, wastewater, and sewer funds. So that's accounting for in that transfer, and we're not expecting any increases in those revenues for 2025. So when you put it into a pie, roughly 43% of the property taxes we collect helps fund the general fund. So 57% come from other sources. That includes things that we touched on. Roughly 14% come from state aid, another 18% comes from charges, and 18% comes from the various different utilities that transfer into our general fund. Some just additional facts in our general fund revenues for 2025. Includes a 5.8% tax levy increase. As I noted, 43% of the general fund is from property taxes. There is no increase in our pilot payment for 2025. We did receive a minimal increase in LGA. We did receive, like I said, fire and police pension increases, but that once again goes into the police and fire pension funds. One of the new things for this year, you may recall this last year at the state level, that there was a new tax on retail deliveries. We received our first payment this fall, and that's what we're anticipating and receiving next year from the state for that new tax that was established on retail deliveries. So the city is going to get roughly $52,000 of that, and that's being allocated to road and street improvements. Like I said, it does include a slight increase in building permit fees. The other large increase is the city's taken over fuel sales out at the airport because we can't find a FBO operator at this point. But that will show back up in expenses too. And then as I noted, we get about $2.8 million in transfers in. That's from the liquor Hutch, Creekside, Hutch Utilities. So if you were to eliminate those three items and not adjust city programming, you're looking at about a 48% tax levy increase. So that's the value of what those enterprise brings into the city. And then we have some small increases in charges for service within the DMV and the civic arena that we're projecting for next year. Talked about revenues, now we're talking about the expenses within our general fund for next year. Wages and benefits at about $10.5 million. That's a 4.9% increase from last year, or from 24 to 25. We see about a 13.6% increase in supplies. That's mainly, most of that is regarding about the $100,000 that we're going to need to purchase ourselves for the fuel. So you may see that we're going to get about $107,000 in revenue and about $100,000 in expenses. So we're looking at net about $7,000 from taking over those fuel sales out at the airport. Service and charges, that's mainly due to software and licensing requirements. The city is having to transfer to some Microsoft 365 next year, and so that's going to be, I think, about $100,000 impact to the city. Miscellaneous expenses are staying about the same, and then transfers out. That's our cost to help run the HATS facility, and then the money that we put into our capital fund for fleet. And so we increased our fleet contribution $25,000 for 2025. So looking at the allocation of general fund expenses from 24 to 25, it's kind of a breakdown. You're not going to see a whole lot of fluctuation. Our largest expense within general fund is public safety. That's going to be around 34%. General government is about 26%. Culture and recreation is 22.5%. And then streets and highways about 15%. One thing people may say, that's not a whole lot of money that's going to our road improvements. One thing to keep in mind is that we have a roughly $10 million capital project fund every year, of which 80% of that goes to roads and bridges, and so there's a good portion of that capital fund that goes into that investment. This is just more of a historical look at the graph and what our general fund budget has done over the years. Usually when you see a pretty significant jump, it's because there's been staff added. From 16 to 17, that's when the aquatic center came on. We've got a couple new positions that are being added this upcoming year. But generally, we're looking at that 5 to 6% increase in general fund expenses. Some additional facts on our expenses. Wages and benefits are expected to increase by 4.9%. It's almost $500,000. That includes annual performance reviews and adjustments. It includes a new fire inspector, firefighter position. It also includes with having issues at filling our D&B positions, we moved one of those part-time to a full-time position. And then having some issues with finding an engineer. We had budgeted for an engineering tech, about half of that position in 24. We're budgeting for the full amount in 2025. And so that's some of what plays into it. Wages and benefits count for 68% of our general fund. That's the largest expense by far. We are a people-driven organization when it comes to local government. I think since I've been here, that's been as low as probably 67%. But we are generally 67, 68% of our expenses go to pay our employees. As I know, it doesn't include increases in supply costs to account for the city taking over fuel at the airport. We have some large cost increases for software and licensing. And then we did increase our funding for our fleet for vehicles for 2025. That's a quick rundown of our general fund. I'd like to touch on the enterprise funds at this meeting as well. Once again, for those that may not be familiar with it, these are the business aspect of the city. So property taxes do not go to support any one of these enterprise funds. These are all fully supported by the fees and revenues collected. So you can see both so everything from our liquor to our compost to the city garbage contract to water, wastewater, and stormwater. Those are all 100% fee driven. There are no property taxes that go to help support any of those funds. Those are projected increases and decreases in both revenue and expenses for our liquor fund, our compost fund, our garbage fund, water, wastewater, and stormwater. I'm not going to go through each and every single one of these. You have a copy of those, obviously on the screen and on your desk. But any large increases that you may see has to do with a capital improvement. So we're making an improvement to a building, or we're making improvements to an operation, whether we're talking about a water or wastewater facility. I think the important thing to look at is the cash balances on each and every one of those funds. And so each and every one of those funds are healthy. You may notice and say, hey Matt, you're showing a negative cash flow. Correct. We're using cash to make improvements to our facilities instead of having to borrow money to make those. And so that's part of what the analysis that Andy does is he looks at our fund balances going, okay, we have a target based off of our debt and our revenue needs, and can we pay for these improvements with cash, or do we need to borrow money? I think all these factors don't have us borrowing any money to make those improvements. So yes, you may be losing money in a given year, but that's because we have a high fund balance to where we can account for that and not have to borrow to make those. I think the important thing to look at though is those estimated cash balances that you can see are healthy for every single one of those funds. Some additional facts on our enterprise funds. Liquor Hutch and Creekside continue to do well. We contribute $670,000 to our general fund in 2025. We have another 5% increase in our garbage rates. This is probably the second of 4 straight increases. Now part of that is you go and you factor where do we want our cash balances to be at. And we have those targets. That's the reason behind these rate increases within both garbage and our stormwater. Transfers to the general fund from the enterprise funds will be $870,000. Total enterprise money, that's the payment when you include Hutch Utilities, that's their payment in lieu of taxes, is once again just over $2.8 million. And capital needs are continuing to obviously have a big impact on our expenses at those facilities. I could say we're upkeeping those facilities to ensure that Hutchinson doesn't run into any problems like some other communities. When we look at our water and our wastewater plant, I think we're at 50% capacity for both of those. And what that means is that we could grow, we could almost double in size. We have enough capacity of those water and wastewater plants to meet the needs of the community, which is a good thing. There's a lot of communities, and especially in rural Minnesota, that are having to pay for new plants, and you're looking at $50, $60, $70 million for those new plants. And luckily, we're not in a position of having a need to do that. So as we get to the last kind of quarter, the last 15 minutes of this presentation, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about another aspect of our budget. That's our capital improvement plan and our debt management plan. So our capital improvement plan, those are our large items. That's facilities, equipment, roads, infrastructure. We have a plan, a 5-year plan that we budget out for every year. And this is what the current 5-year plan looks for. 2026 is a little skewed because we're trying to get money from the state for the HAS facility. That's a $10 million project, $10 to $12 million project in itself. So where does that roughly $70 million over the next 5 years, where is that being allocated to? 33% of that is going to infrastructure, 29% is enterprise, so that's the water plant, the wastewater plant mainly, maybe some improvements out at Creekside or the liquor store, but that's mainly driven by the water and wastewater plant. Unless you want to grab that for you. Public Works is about 22%. That's mainly our airport, cemetery, vehicles and equipment. Park and Rec is another 10%. With public safety and general government rounding out the remaining 6%. And where does that funding come from? Roughly 29% is enterprise funds. So that's the revenue that's created from the water plant, the wastewater plant. Another 30% we're projected to get either state or federal aid or grants to help fund for some of that. That includes state aid for road projects, maybe bridge funds. About 17% of that will be borrowed money. That'll be new debt that we have factored into our debt plan. 13% is property taxes. Some of it may be new. Some of it may be taxes that have already been collected. But about $1.6 million per year goes to help for those capital improvements. Another 7% is special assessments. That'll be assigned directly to the benefited property owners. We do have some unfunded projects right now, and those projects will just keep getting pushed back until funding is available if we do not receive that. And so those are areas that we're looking to get either money from the state or private donors to help pay for. So what's going on next year? Roughly, we have about 12 to 14 million within our capital fund. About 40% of that's going to infrastructure. That's Franklin Street redevelopment, Dale Street, Hassett Street. Those are 3 big projects for next year. Another 41% is in the enterprise funds. That's improvements mainly to the water and wastewater plant. I think it's the last phase or 3rd phase of our water meter replacements are coming out of that. another 5% in public works, park and rec, and then the biggest one in public safety is that ladder truck that we're projecting for next year. This is our debt management plan. This goes into that portion of the tax levy that we talked about that goes towards debt. We saw a big impact when the police station came on board back in 2023. One of the new things that are being proposed for next year is a debt allocation to help pay for the ladder truck. That's just under 2.1 million. Yes, that's what a ladder truck costs to replace. But there may be an option, we'll be talking about this with the council at their next council meeting, to pay for this with cash without a need to having to borrow money. That's a decision the council is going to have to make. If they do make that decision, that means they'll be eliminating roughly $70,000 in property taxes for next year. But there is a scenario out there that we're going to be presenting to the council where they could pay for that new truck without having to borrow money or increase taxes to pay for that. So that's really the only new debt that, a lot of times our debt structure is structured in a way that when old debt falls off, it's being replaced with new debt at that same level, so we're not having maybe these peaks in our debt levy increases. That's part of the reason why we have a capital improvement plan and why we budget things out more than just next year. It's really 5-10-year plans that are out there. So as I kind of wrap this up and we get to the point where we'll take public input, just want to go over some summaries. As I noted, the tax statement that went out in the mail in September included a 7.9% increase in the property taxes. Since that time, we've eliminated about $184,000 in taxes, which is about a 2.1% decrease in property taxes. And so that number, assuming this gets approved by the council, will go down from what you received in the mail, with the potential to go down maybe another even almost 70,000 if we don't borrow money for the fire truck. In general, our general fund is projected to go up 5.5% in revenue and expenses, with our property taxes going up 5.9% within our general fund, 5.6% with an overall tax levy increase of 5.8% from the city. If the council approves the EDA and HRA levies as presented to them, that'll be another 3.3% and 3% with the total tax impact on which the council has a say on of 5.7% for next year. So the two biggest factors behind the levy increase. One is general wage and benefit increases, along with a couple of additional positions that are expected to be added to the budget for next year. That's just under $500,000. And the second one is that additional debt that's being factored in for that new fire ladder truck that's currently being budgeted for next year. Those are the two biggest reasons behind the property tax increase for next year. Some additional information. Once again, the 2020 budget includes an additional fire inspector position and some change in staffing models at the DMV and engineering. Staffing costs and capital needs are still the biggest driver of our budget. Fund balances continue to remain high, and the fiscal condition of the city is healthy. I think our general fund balance is at 55%, which is well within the recommended levels of 40% that the state recommends, so 35 to 50%. The state's budget forecast is projecting a slight surplus, which means right now we're not anticipating any significant changes at the state that would have an impact on our budget next year. On top of that, home values continue to increase, and the city is continuing to see growth at all levels, including multifamily, commercial, industrial growth within the city. Inflation and supply chain issues continue to impact the city as well, although I will say it's getting better, especially when it comes to ordering heavy equipment, but there's still some challenges that are out there. So with that, any, I guess, questions from council members? Otherwise, Mayor, I'd ask that you open it up to the public for any feedback or any questions. There's a lot of information I shared. I can easily go back if there's something you want me to highlight. But really, this is that moment in this hearing where I've done enough talking. I think my voice is starting to tell me that. It's really to turn it back over to the council for any comments, suggestions, and then to hear from the public on any comments, questions, concerns they may have on the budget or the tax levy.
All right, thanks, Matt. Council, have any questions for Matt?
Matt, when we're doing the 19 outstate regional centers,
Yeah.
and the LGA is ours is at third lowest.
Yeah.
Do you know what sets that or why we're lowest on the?
Yeah, there's a form that's given by the state. I think the biggest factor is that our homes are too new. You know, so the biggest factor is the amount of homes that were built in the 50s and 60s. Most of our housing stock was actually built in the 80s and 90s. And so the formula that's used to factor that is what impacts that payment to the state. So the only way to get that increase is if you change the formula. Well, you can imagine, or have the state give more money into local government aid. Now, we saw a pretty significant increase, 2 years ago in local government aid. But if you could imagine what that formula change would mean and what that impact would mean on
Everything. 800
other cities that are receiving local government aid. There are cities in the state that don't get local government aid. A lot of those are your metro cities who, I would say your suburbs, who had most of their housing boom in that were after the 50s and 60s. But that's formula based, yeah.
Matt, you said, and I'm just clarifying here, you said the cost of services like renting a park or something went up 10%.
Yeah.
Or building permits, I'm sure all
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah.
But we have a factor in the budget for those, for the funds coming in. Is that shown in the line items or is this a 10% increase?
That's line items. So I think there's some additional revenue coming in the ice arena because I think we were able to sell more ice time.
The big driver is the airport fuel. That's a big portion of that increase of.
And that was my next question. We're purchasing the airport fuel, but we're selling the airport.
Correct.
Yes.
So that would be in and out.
And in and out
Yeah.
with a slight profit.
Yeah.
Right, but then so we're showing the decrease because we had to do the initial purchase?
So you're going to see them both, and I'll go back and I'll highlight that for you, Tim.
Okay.
So service and charges, you'll see that supplies. You know, that's roughly $150,000 increase. 100,000 of that is for the fuel that we need to purchase.
Correct.
Okay? And you go over to the revenue side, charges for service, so we're charging when people use that fuel, that went up 10.6%. 107,000 of that is for fuel revenue.
Oh,
So, and then some miscellaneous, I think we have another 20,000 in DMV fees, and so, yeah, it's not a
that's okay. I
drastic.
saw the in, but
Yeah.
I saw the out, but I didn't see where you
Yes.
put the in.
Yes.
So that
Yeah.
kind of confused
So
me.
it's not necessarily across the board, it's based off of.
The other question, I had a few questions, but the event center,
Yep.
I mean, the cost of the event center, of operating the event center, we're not bringing in close to what that event center is.
Not close.
What is the differential of that?
I think we're around $120,000, $130,000 loss right now, which is better than 3 years ago when it was about $180,000, but we've kind of tamped down operations, gearing up for a potential sale of the property.
Because it looked like there was an increase this year in expenses.
The event center?
Yes.
It could have been, we do have, you have to remember we have our senior center that's out there. And so we do have staff that are out there, so you could have some increase in wages for the staff that work out there, along with maybe even some utility increases
Shouldn't
too.
be too big of increases though. Do you have a sheet that shows by department?
I was just looking at the right page here.
Unfortunately, I didn't bring my departmental sheet.
I'll get to the right thing here. And I marked it.
We can back to you, Tim, too.
Civic Arena fees, rents.
Civic Arena is different than the.
Yep, that's the Civic Arena.
Yeah.
So the rentals building, that's your event center rent. So we're showing about 79,000 of rent coming in for the event center.
Okay,
We have a church that runs space out there, and then we still are doing some.
Yeah, the
Rentals.
church, we increased the church's rental 5,000. That's the increase you're seeing.
and like I said, they're just pointing out that we're sitting on a loss, significant loss on that building.
You know, and I think it's important when I share this all the time. None of our recreational facilities make money. They're all publicly subsidized.
And I get concerned because I don't know, you know, when I talk to the public and they're like, we need better streets, we need this, and, you know, 26% of our budget goes to Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
And people love Parks and Rec, but it comes down to our public safety's at 34%, and that's what we're pretty much tagged to do is, as a council, is public safety and those concerns, and I hate to say it, but Parks and Rec kind of falls back here a little bit, but it's such a huge part over our streets and over what we're doing, and I just want to make sure we're maintaining, well, we have to decide, do we want to go to a park, or do we want to use the roads? And we get those complaints, and from half, and it would be nice for the council to hear feedback from our citizens, and more feedback on what's more important, and how do we adjust this to fix this. Now, we can look, and we're looking right now, at ways of doing things in parks and recreation that are more, what word do I want to use?
Efficient.
Efficient, and that would bring that down a little bit so we could, but still, that's always an issue with me is, what are we providing here? We have a plethora of parks in this community, and it's a wonderful community. It's just how much of that bears.
You know, the other thing to keep in mind too, we have an aquatic center,
Yes,
we have a rec center, we have a nice arena with 2 sheets. You know, we obviously have several ball fields in the 40-some parks, so that's, all of that goes into that park and rec budget. And so, you know, that's probably higher than some communities who don't have an ice rink, or don't have an
like I said, it
aquatics.
wasn't the criticizing.
No,
it
no,
was
but
the
I think that's,
efficiency of it.
yeah, no, I think it's just an important thing to keep in mind when we look at that. Probably a higher percentage is the amenities that are associated with that some communities may have, and some communities may not have, so.
No, you're absolutely correct. Those are my questions, just.
Well, I travel a ton, and I'll take the Pepsi test with any surrounding community on who has better streets. I mean, I've driven it, I think our street system's taken well care of. I mean, it's budgeted in. Those are our major funding projects every year.
And the plan we have for maintenance of the streets, the outlook and everything that we're using has been great. We're gonna have to start looking at alleys and public parking. I know we're gonna look at adding those, which always, well, that's more expense, but, and we look down the road and how do we become more efficient? And that's the point that I'm making is just looking at new ways of integrating more efficiency into this.
All right, anything else for Matt, from the council? All right, I'll open it up for public comment if anybody in the audience wants to have a question for Matt. Go ahead, Marty.
What's the $100,000 software and licensing that is causing the increase?
We have to convert to Microsoft 365, right? Or, yeah,
365.
so that's the citywide conversion. So that's where that large increase is. So that's, well, in one sense, it'll be a one-time fee for the conversion, but then we'll get, I'm sure, hit every year after that with,
Yeah, their fees for licensing goes up every year, doesn't go down.
One more question.
Sure.
On the Where We Stand, it said we got 3.1 million LGA payment in 2024? Is
Yeah.
that- Okay. I didn't see that on the other sheet. Is it spread out?
We use half in the general fund, and then the other half goes to our capital projects
Yes.
fund to
Okay.
fund facility improvements, park, playground equipment, fleet.
So we
Yeah.
split it in half.
So,
I was gonna say, Matt, if you could take the questions and then reiterate them.
Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah, so it's the public. Yeah, so the one question was on the 3.1 million in local government aid. So this was back in, I think, 2012. The city used to have all this local government aid going to the general fund. It was probably even prior to that, 2010. For those that have been around local government for a while, there was an allotment where they had a significant decrease in local government aid. If you can imagine all that fund going into all those monies going into the general fund, it had a pretty significant impact on the general fund. So at that time, the previous council made a decision, said we're no longer going to be as much of dependent on local government aid within our general fund. We're going to split it up. We're going to put some of that into the capital and some of it within the general fund. I think at that time it was 40-60. 40 went into general, 60 went into capital. We've since adjusted that policy over time where now it's 50-50. So the idea is if unallotment occurs again in the future, the likely impact is going to be, well, the council will have to make that decision, is we're either going to be doing less capital improvements or less services within the general fund. So when you see it in your budget, that's, once again, we're going over the general fund. That's why it looks like a lot less, is because only 50% of that is in the general fund. So.
All right, last question for me.
Sure.
What's the pros and cons of the buying the fire truck with cash, the $70,000?
Oh yeah, the question was the pros and cons of buying the fire truck with cash versus borrowing, right?
You said that's going to be at the next meeting, so.
Yeah, it'll be a conversation at the next council meeting. The pros is it's not going to be a direct impact to the tax levy. Is that, well, then the cons are is that you're going to be taking funds out of reserves to pay for that. Now, part of the reason you have reserves is for those unassumed circumstances that may occur. And so that's part of the decision the council is going to have to make is, are you willing to reduce a fund? Maybe it's our community improvement fund. Maybe it's our capital projects fund. Maybe it's taking money from our water and wastewater fund to help pay for a fire truck. That maybe somewhere down the road you're going to look back on, we really need that money now, or maybe it will be something that works out. And I think it's similar to anybody who's going to borrow money or pay cash on it. We have enough cash where we can pay for it. That's going to mean that we're going to dilute reserves somewhere to do that.
And we did that with the aquatic center, correct?
Correct. We've done it with the aquatic center in the past, and the negative impact on that is that it pushed back improvements to a lot of other facilities. But we were able to do that without having to borrow money. And so that's the same discussion the council's going to have to make is, we can pay for this by borrowing money, or we can take money out of reserves to pay for that without having to borrow for it and increase the tax levy.
And for that, as we discussed, that could be a mix.
Yep.
Correct. And the good thing with the fire truck is the payments are likely over 2 to 3 years, so that gives us time to set money aside in some of these other funds to dedicate towards the ladder truck.
Well, we have other vehicles that are coming up for replacement too, so this puts us on track to keep us online with those other vehicles that we'll have to replace.
Can I ask your question?
Any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, I built my house 46 years ago and still live in it. And the taxes the last few years have been going up $250 on, every year. And this year, it shows that the estimated market value went up $23. And I get charged at $300 this year.
Okay.
Higher. Now, that sounds crazy.
Sure. So your market value went up?
That's 8.30%.
Sure.
And
Huh.
something's wrong.
How much of that is the city's taxes?
My house is only 1,536 square feet. It's not a big house.
Sure. No, what you said your value went up. How much did your value go up?
$23.
$23. Okay.
And the taxes went up $300.
Was that in total, or is that the city's portion of your taxes?
That's right here, whatever it is, the total.
That seems a little
you-
different because the
it's just
valuations
this
are
line to the
different.
software.
Yeah.
Can I come take a look
Just
at it?
talking about the line that says City of Hutchinson.
Well, anyway,
The increase in
went
tax.
from last year to this year, went
Sure.
up $300.
Sure. So
Your estimated value there is only $23.
it's $23,000.
23,000?
Yep.
What's the last year's value?
It was 263.1 to 288.1.
63.
So you're-
Anyway, a person my age,
Sure.
I'm getting taxed right out of my house.
Sure.
I don't know how the world I'm gonna be able to stay there.
Sure.
You know, do we really need a new ladder truck? They don't wear out that fast, they don't get used that much. We got a ladder truck, and we got to buy. Why do we need to buy a ladder truck for over $2 million?
Sure.
It's ridiculous as heck.
Sure. I just want to note something on yours, that your city taxes went down.
No, I don't call it down when I gotta pay $300 more.
No. So this is the city's portion, $1,355.40. That was paid in '24. What's being proposed is $1,539.80. So that means your county tax went up and your school
Something
district
had to
tax.
go up to get
Yeah,
there.
the county and the school district tax went up. So, Mike, do you want to address the fire truck or don't you, since you're here in attendance?
I don't think we need it, to be honest with you.
Oh, that's fine, and that's why we have the council.
Why is it over $2 million? That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And you wanna build a splash pad? We don't need a splash pad. You know what's gonna happen if we build it out there? The geese are gonna poop all over.
And I would say that's what the council members are here from you to hear from. So,
It's just ridiculous.
I can touch on that.
The city doesn't know how to not spend money, and the police station went way over. You know that. Why? If a contractor told me it's gonna build a house for a certain amount of dollars, that's what it would be.
Sure.
And why should it go way over? Something is a little bit screwy.
How much did it go over?
I don't know, but it was a lot.
The hard part of money, I think, is when the bids are put in, it's almost a cost plus now. We're held by the cost of the material. We went through, I'm not making excuses, I'm just telling, we went through COVID, and that just blew everything apart. There was no way we could have predicted that was gonna happen, you know, and I'm not, again, trying to make excuses, but that was part and parcel why we went over so much on them.
Well, I think there's some screw-ups that shouldn't have happened either. You put that great big heated step down to that street. Imagine a street across from, and the next week you're air hammering it out. I mean, that's a lot of money.
Lenny, this isn't a platform for complaining about the police station. This is truth and taxation where the money gets spent.
Well,
If you want to address this another time, you can.
that's not good planning, I'll tell you that.
All right. Do you want to hear about the new platform truck, or
Yeah.
did you get, Mike, could you address that, please?
So the ladder, all of our heavy equipment, the ladder truck, the engines, they're on a 25-year replacement schedule. We try to stay with that, stay up on the maintenance and keep them at that. The price at $2 million, I hate that price too. It's unfortunately where the market has gone in the last 3-4 years or since COVID. The pricing on that stuff has gone up 20, 30, 40%. You know, we used to be able to estimate these out at normal increases of 3%, 5% a year, which is pretty normal. In the last 4 or 5, it's went crazy. So to your point, yeah, that truck is not used or doesn't go out nearly as much as, to your point, you know, it's not our highest used truck. Our grass rig and our engines go out more, but we have to stay on that schedule to keep the piece of equipment. We have to have it certified every year by 2 different entities that come in. They certify the pump, they certify the aerial. Once they get to a certain age, and this one's getting to that age where all of a sudden, I've got an estimate sitting on my desk for $26,000 of repairs for next year. That,
The old ones wore out, is that what you're saying?
well, it's at that age where they become obsolete or.
They have to be certified every year.
Yeah, it's gonna be certified every year, but the equipment on there, all the sensors, the computers, we've already been told by the manufacturers that they're not gonna support that truck anymore. They're not gonna make those parts for that as time goes on. So we have 5 computer systems on there, a whole bunch, so it's gonna reach a point where that annual cost to keep that thing functioning is gonna skyrocket. Well, then we're too late. Now we're behind the 8 ball, and we have a truck that we can't have it out of service for weeks or months or a year at a time getting repairs done. So it's unfortunate. I do not like the cost of those trucks either. But it's where we're at. And every other municipality is fighting the same battle. The cost of fleet in general, especially heavy fleet, has gone up across the board. And I understand your frustration because I'm frustrated as well, honestly. But it's what we got to deal with. So.
And we are obligated to have a platform truck because of our high rises in town.
And our school.
Well, that's been here for years, the high rise.
Yeah, when I was on the fire department, we had a 100-foot ladder truck. So we had to have one back when those park towers in Evergreen was built. So we are required to have some kind of platform truck or ladder truck. So, any other questions? Anything else from the council? No.
Jim Lauer, 775 Lower Avenue Southwest, and also board member for the VFW Post 906. So from both sides of it, interesting, the initial presentation that talked about the fact that valuations have gone up again, and they're always continually going up year after year. Capacity is going up, not as much, but it's still going up. So the basis on which we get our taxes without changing the rate is higher and higher every year. The bad news is that you talked about the 2025 statewide proposed increases for municipalities of being 8.8%. Ours was 7.9. You talked about the expected revised ones after all the truths and taxation meetings as being 6.0%. Ours from the staff is 5.8.
No, Jim, that was all taxing. So that included, if you added everything up to 6%. That's
Okay.
not prior to final, that's including county, city, including it all as one, it's a 6%.
For the entire, but that number was tied to the statewide number.
Correct,
Okay.
of all taxing districts. So.
Okay, so all taxing entities, but we've got the 5.8. Slide 23 listed the options, 1, 2, 3, 4, that were considered. I don't know if you can get to that slide or not. And right now, the revised proposal is option 3, I believe, the 5.8. So actually, the lowest increase that was considered in option 2 was a 4.5. The 0 just thrown in is not doing anything. A couple of interesting things to take that in light with. Inflation, we still have a month left, but inflation, the experts say, is expected to come in between 2.4 and 2.6% for the year. Cost of living increases have already been fixed, COLAs, for fixed income people that are on disability, Social Security, government retirements, and they're all set for 2025 at 2.5%. So the money the taxpayers have coming in from income, and right now they're projecting the average wage to increase somewhere between 2 and 3% for 2025. Not sure exactly what the proposed wage part of this personnel costs are. Obviously, benefits takes up a big piece of that. So the people that are being taxed are looking at their income changing about 2.5%. But we don't have a 2.5% option just to match what people's increases are being. We didn't even look at that as being an option to match that. You're going the right direction with the 5.8, but again, it's more than double what people's incomes are changing, even though the capacity and the valuations are continuing to increase. So I would say, that's one of the things to keep in mind, if not for this year, but as we do the budgeting, are we even looking at options to keep it at the rate that people's incomes are changing?
Well, I can answer that because I agree with you 100% on that. I mean, we see people struggling. We are, in some cases, we are ourselves. That's what I was bringing up earlier, was how do we become more efficient? Because we have to become more efficient to get these numbers down.
Right.
And so that's what.
And you look at the other entities, the counties, is a 2.5% proposed increase. That's the max they can still come down from that. The school district is a 5.5%.
And I think
They
our
can come down
counties,
from that. So even our final 5.8 is going to be a higher increase than the county. It's going to be higher than the school district. And it's just a philosophy of where we start the planning on the budgets.
and the good part is this hasn't all been solidified. The 5.8 isn't even a.
Correct. You haven't decided on that yet. And that's why I'm saying that's one of the things that should be kept in mind when you finalize it, if not from the initial planning stage. But you haven't even been given the tools to tie it to the inflation and cost of living. What we've done is we've matched it to budget and budget to expected revenues as our budgeting tool. And that's just a philosophy, I think, not just us, but all municipalities need to read that.
Can I address some of that?
Yeah.
One of the questions we ask our council every year is the level of services they want to provide to the community. So that's part of what goes into establishing that budget.
Understand. But again, it's higher than the inflation rate. And even things like, we know the fire truck, it's gone up faster than inflation. Our payroll, not counting benefits, hasn't gone up average much more than inflation or COLA. That's the argument we make when we decide what we're paying our city employees. Here's what inflation is, and you've also progressed in your grade and staying longer with the county and promotions. So that's part of that piece. So we're arguing on one side, but it's just one of the things I think we need to keep in mind when we start the process, and then when we decide, okay, what's the impact going to be on what's a aging population here in town, more and more people on fixed incomes here in town as we're servicing them. And I got that perspective now because now that I'm retired, I'm on a fixed income. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's tough to live on that fixed income, I'll tell you, because everything's going up the way it is.
Any other comments? All right, motion to close taxation.
Make a motion to adjourn. Second.
Motion by Chad, second by Walter. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried.
Thanks, everyone. If anybody has any questions, Andy and I will be around to answer whatever we can.